So there were a lot of years before Kahlua came around when surely other people would have been combining coffee and alcohol. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Bottle number 66 is Coloma coffee liqueur from Colombia. If that name sounds familiar, it's because I talked about it way back in bottle 27, Convié Menta. Convié and Coloma are part of the same company, and that episode was a rollicking good time with paternity suits, deathbed DNA tests, and international diplomatic scandals. So go watch it if you haven't already. But it does mean I don't have anything left to say about Coloma coffee liqueur. As I talked about in the previous episode, Coloma began making liqueur at their coffee hacienda outside Bogota in the 1960s. I dated my bottle of Convié Menta from the 1970s to the 1990s, since that's when they were making that style of minis. This tiny bottle has a US government warning label on the back, meaning it's likely 1989 or later. I'm going to guess 1990s for both this bottle and the mint one. But that would make for a really short episode, so I thought I'd see what I could find out about the history of coffee liqueur. I talked about the timeline of the two best-known brands in bottle 40, Tia Maria. Kahlua was invented in 1936, and then Tia Maria 10 years later in 1946. But humans started consuming coffee in the 1500s, and alcohol production goes back thousands of years. So there were a lot of years before Kahlua came around when surely other people would have been combining coffee and alcohol. It was really hard to find out anything about its earliest days. A couple web pages credit Frère David, a French monk from an unnamed order, with creating the first coffee liqueur in the 1600s, but I couldn't find any details or evidence to back that up. Bottle number 42 is about Dubonnet, the French aperitif wine, and it has green coffee listed as one of its botanicals now, but I don't know if that was true in 1846 when it was created. Spain also gets in on the early action. Aperitivo de Café de Alcoy, aka Café Liqueur, has protected geographical indication status. This is a 15 to 25% ABV coffee liqueur with roots going back to 1844 when street coffee vendors began adding some brandy to their wares in the wintertime. Commercial production of the combination followed, but sources vary on how quickly that happened. The drink is associated with the region's famous Moors and Christians festivals, which makes sense given that the Moors first introduced coffee to the Iberian Peninsula during their period of rule there. Famous brands include Cerol and Sancho. On the other side of Spain, Galicia also claims to have a historic coffee liqueur they call Liqueur. This one is made from grappa, reported to be higher proof and sweeter than Café Liqueur, and is consumed as an after-dinner drink, not an aperitif. The article claimed that the first published recipe for that was in 1850. Italy also has an origin story. In terms of currently existing brands of coffee liqueur claiming roots in the 1800s, the earliest I could find is Caffè Borghetti, previously marketed as Caffè Sport. This was invented in 1860 by Ugo Borghetti, owner of the Caffè Sport, located in Ancona, Italy, near the railway. 1860 marked the completion of the Pescara-Ancona railway line, and Borghetti's combination of alcohol and coffee was so popular with travelers on the route that he commercialized it, and had some amazing ads through the years. Perhaps Café Sport is the coffee liqueur that the drunken botanist author Amy Stewart is referring to in her article on caffeine. She says that coffee was being turned into liqueur beginning in the early 1800s, and that in 1862 an example of it was shown at the International Exhibition in London. I found evidence of Café Sport in the US from as early as 1912, although the ad declares their own special bottling to be as good as the imported kinds, so it might have been a knockoff. But a 1917 ad seems more likely to have been the legit imported stuff. After some troubles in the 1970s, the brand was purchased by the Branca company of Fernet Branca fame and is still around today as Café Borghetti. Other sources point back to France. I didn't manage to dig up any early direct references, but I found a newspaper ad from 1861 for a new book about brewing. It also contained the proper formulas for compounding English cordials and foreign liqueurs. Crème de café appears on that list, which implies that it was already a known thing by then. I'm sure I missed tons of things similar to Café Sport, but which didn't turn up from searching coffee liqueur. But that term starts to show up in newspaper ads in 1935 with the release of Cava coffee liqueur. The brand acknowledges that others had tried to blend coffee and alcohol in the past, but claimed that the scientific mind of today has succeeded where old world experiments had failed. I also found ads that year for K. McGee Mexican coffee liqueur and one from New Jersey distillery Black Prince. Coffee liqueur clearly was having a moment in the 1930s, which Kahlua would be part of when it was invented in 1936. And I strongly suspect there is a bottle of that in Grandma's collection, so I'm going to wait to say anything more about it until then. In the meantime, I've now compiled what I think is the most comprehensive, but certainly not complete, history of coffee liqueur on the internet. I knew this project would lead me to great things! Do you know of any other early coffee liqueurs? Any insight into what must have been going on in France during the same time? Drop a comment below or at my website, mytinybottles.com, or on social media. You'll find me at mytinybottles on Instagram and Facebook, and Tammy Coxon on Blue Sky. Also, please like and subscribe. Thanks! And if you'd like to support My Tiny Bottles and get access to bonus content, please become a supporter of my Patreon. Cheers!